was a nice meal. I think we'll go home. It's worth coming all this way. Can you hear? Can I just check the acoustics are okay? In which case I'll talk. It's very good to be back. It always is good to come back to Rothley. We were here for 8 years. They were the happiest years, really, of our life and our ministry. Because it's been really hard since then. But you, seriously, but you might not realise that when we came to Rothley, we'd come from a very difficult situation where I was very tempted to jack the whole thing in, and go back to GCHQ or something like that. So if you ever get the impression from your smiling vicar that ministry is easy, but most of the time it's quite demanding. And I'm very grateful to Rob for letting me come back into his parish again. We were here for 8 years. I think you've been here for about 16, so twice as long as we were here. 15. You obviously did something right. So we kept you. Linda was reminding me earlier about when we were living in the vicarage, and our youngest son Andrew, he reminded us recently, he went into the field next door to find some conkers. And what happened?
First of all, he threw a stick into one of the great big trees to get the conkers down. Stick landed on his face, so he was kind of half blinded with this. And then he saw cows, a whole mass of them coming towards him. So he thought he might run away. So he ran straight into some nettles. And then because of the part of the field that he'd run to get away from the cows, he had to come through the stream to get back into our garden. So he came into the house, bedraggled, with a cut on his face, nettle stings, and all he wanted was a couple of coffees.
So we've bred really successful children, she's trying to say. I remember one of the things when we came to Rothley was that when I was a kid in Liverpool, we used to go and play football in the park down the road, and there was a church next to the park, and we knew it was time to come home. It was about 7:30, just before 7:30 in the evening, when the Aer Lingus 737 flew over, and then the church bells, they stopped their ringing practice. And so when I came to Rothley, I'd never had bells before. So I thought, well, you've got to make a connection with the bell ringers. So I went up the tower, I think the second or third week that we were here. And they were ringing the bells, and it was a great mystery to me. And they showed me the knitting patterns that they follow. It's all these, it's like statistics and accounts, isn't it? It's incomprehensible. And then, unless you're an accountant or a bell ringer. And then they stopped, and we sat round and we had a chat, and I said to them, do you know what I really like about the bells? I like it when you get a bit of syncopation, when it goes da 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 da. And there was this horrible silence. And this guy said, that's a mistake. So the whole point is that it's all evenly spaced, isn't it? Anyway, maybe that's why they got rid of us after that. And a bit after that, I think I'd left Rothley by the time I heard the story of the American table tennis team that during the Nixon years went and did a tour of communist China. It was the first time this had happened. And there were two senators who decided to try and put a bill through the Senate to get all the church bells ringing across the states to celebrate the return of the table tennis team to Hong Kong. And it didn't go through. It was sponsored by Senator Spong of Illinois and Senator Fong of Hawaii. So had it got through, it would have been known as the Spong Fong Hong Kong Ping Pong Ding Dong Bell Day. We'll try doing that after 3 glasses of wine. I remember, obviously thinking back to the MBA group and why we did it. One of the things that I think is really important about the church and about its ministry, and how you connect with a wider community is how do you grab the attention? It's the hard bit, especially when people often have prejudices about what we're about or who we are, or church is for those sorts of people or for them, it's not for us. And we reinforce that in lots of ways. One of the things that, as you know, I do a lot of radio stuff. I'm doing Thought for the Day Radio 4 next Thursday. I can't remember when I'm doing Chris Evans again. But one of the things you do when you're doing Chris Evans particularly, you've got an audience of 10 million people, and they haven't asked to hear someone talk about God. Especially on a Friday, when you've got all the guests in. I was in 2 weeks ago with Robbie Williams and Anne Robinson and a couple of actors, and the Shires doing a brilliant cover version of Angels. It's great live music as well. And what you've got to do in a way that grabs the attention of the people in the studio who could do a million other things while you're talking, but you have to try and get them looking at you. And you've got 2 minutes, it's about 340 words. I usually squeeze in about 380. I usually do the script on the train on the way down the day before when I know who's going to be in. But you have to grab the attention. You have to stop people going for a wee or to put the kettle on. You've got to grab the attention. You've got to awaken their curiosity so they stick with it. You've got to tease their imagination. It's not all about intellect and ideas. You've got to tease the imagination because that's what will scratch away 10 hours later or the next day. And then you've got to say something in all of this and give a payoff back into the culture of the programme. So you avoid what the radio people call the clunk factor. You've got all this great stuff with these great actors and celebs, and it's all, the music and great chat, and Chris is very lively, and then suddenly you go, God. And it's just boring, or it's tedious, or it doesn't fit into the medium. Now, it seemed to me, I wouldn't have put it in this way all those 20 years ago, but the question, I think, in my head when I was vicar from Rothley at the time was, how do we connect with people who don't think we're worth connecting with? Or who have had their experience of church and aren't going to go back? Or it's never entered their head. And yet we have shed loads of people knocking on the door saying, will you marry me? Will you baptise little Johnny? Or do. That's the usual phrase, was, I want Johnny done. I'm glad I'm not a rabbi. Baptism is a bit easier than really snippet. But anyway, and I remember quite early on in my time here, going round the 5 pubs in the village, because someone has to. Really trying to find out just what, because they're all different, aren't they? That was the thing. People were talking Rothley about the village, but actually there were several villages, different communities, constituencies, who didn't always talk together. And I always thought the church is probably the one place where all of this lot can come together. And so I remember going into, the last one I went into was the Old Crown. And it was a Monday evening, and there were 2 guys playing pool, and the guy behind the bar. So I went in, and I said, it's a bit empty, isn't it? And he said, well, it's a Monday. So I said, is it always empty on a Monday? You know, well, it's a Monday. So I said, well, can I have it, like in 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks, I can't remember now, and I'll fill it for you. And he said, do you want the function room? And I said, no, I'll have the bar, but I'll fill it, as long as I can do what I want. So he said, yeah, all right. I'm sure he thought, he'll go out the door, we'll never see him again. So I remember at the time I had a 386, if you remember old computers. And I had one graphic, it took about an hour to download it. There was a beer pump. So I ran off some cards and posters with a beer pump, and all it said was, "Pump the vicar in the old crown." And Monday, 8 o'clock, at the old crown, no holds barred. I think that's all it said. And we put them in the shops, we handed them out. And I think 64 people turned up, including the press, the Loughborough Echo. Started big time. And because they were curious. And what I did, I think, that evening was a 5-minute provocative intro about who is Jesus. And then it was over to question. And I got home at 1:45. And what I learned from, we did it 3 times, and then we said, right, gimmick over. We revived it for the Rothley Festival from time to time, because it had a rarity factor then. But what I discovered that first night is that people would ask questions and say things in the pub they wouldn't ask or say in the church, including church people. You have a different conversation. Usually the refreshments are better. Except at Rothley, where the coffee was marvellous. But I remember at the time thinking, actually, this is what we've got to do. You've got to grab the attention, awaken curiosity, tease the imagination, have something to say, but it's got to fit into the culture, not that we want to impose, but that people actually live it. So you've got to start where people are, not damn them for not being where we think they should be. And my experience at that time in Rothley really was just learning about that dynamic and how to be curious. Now, really funny things. I got an email about 2 weeks ago, maybe less, I'll lose track of time, from Germany, where during my time in Rothley, I was still under the GCHQ sort of ban. It was when I went to London and then became Bishop of Croydon in 2003. I was asked to chair a German commission called the Meissen Commission. And now I do a lot of work in Germany. I'm out there at the end of next week to kick off the 500th anniversary year of the Reformation. So I'll be preaching in Erfurt in the Augustiner Kloster, which is where Martin Luther was a monk before he went off to Wittenberg, and then the rest is history, as it were. And I've done some very big gigs in Germany. 2013, I preached to 130,000 in the Stadtpark in Hamburg at the Kirchentag, televised live on German telly. And I doubt if I'll ever do that again, in Germany. And then last year did, for 12,000 people, did a gig with the German Foreign Minister, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and Kofi Annan about the state of the world. It was for 2 hours. So all of that was sort of developed because I had to relearn my German when I was asked to chair the Meissen Commission and get, grow the confidence to do it. Now, one of the things I got asked to do, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, was to go and launch in Osnabrück a thing that the Germans thought was very innovative, which was engaging volunteers in the life and work of the church, because they've been so full of money, they just they have paid people to do everything. But now it's changing, and they want to learn from the Church of England. In fact, someone does. So I went out there, and one of the stories I told was about the MBA group, about Pump the Vicar in the Old Crown, as a way of illustrating that you've got to get out of this building, and that you have a different conversation. Even with the same people, you have a different conversation in a pub than you would in the church, in a house group, or something like that. It's no good moaning about that, it's how it is. So, the email I got 2 weeks ago is that this is filtered through to the Roman Catholic Church in Germany. We're at a recent meeting of all the Roman Catholic bishops in Germany. They actually went out to a couple of bars and tried to do, pump the Bischof. And they were taking it on, and it derived from something I then wrote subsequently following up that address I did in Osnabrück, which came from the experience here. 20 years later. So you never know, do you, what you're kicking off. Now, I remember, some of you we all select our memories and we reshape them. But I remember thinking we need to do something in Rothley for the people, for the men particularly, who can't belong to house groups. And there were a couple of people, John Eggleston was one of them, who said to me, I can't belong to a house group. I'm never back in time. You know, what is there for people like me? You know, also wanting to think Christianly about the world of work. He was senior partner with KPMG. You know, he was on their UK board for small businesses, and I think he was senior partner in the Midlands. And I remember thinking at the time, it's one thing to do your theology in church, but how does this engage with what we're doing the rest of the week? And how do we learn, people like me, you know, Vicar, how do we learn what that experience and that vocabulary is, so we can actually scratch where people are itching? And I'm not saying this, you know, it's probably all blindingly obvious to you lot, but it wasn't to me. And I knocked this around in my head for a while, not really knowing what to do. And I think it was a year or two before there were a couple of other people. There was Gary Wainwright and Nigel Hillier and Rafe, I think. I remember when I came to Rothley, Rafe would come near the church. They were the good old days, now you wish you could keep them going. We both had hair in those days. And he'll have to tell you what happened. But it didn't cost too much. And I remember taking 4 of these guys to a pub down in, what's the village? Cossington. Thought, get out of the parish. And we had a pint and we sat around and said, right, what are we going to do? And we ended up coming up with this idea, deciding it had to be in a pub, and it would be, I think it was the first Monday of the month or something, or the first one, I can't remember. But it was to be easily memorable. And we set this thing up, and I said, well, I'm not going to be part of it. They call themselves the faculty, right? Because we issued honorary MBA awards. I'll never forget going into the office of the managing director of BBC Radio Leicester and seeing this framed MBA award on his wall. And I said, what's that? And he went, just don't tell them. You know, they're all very impressed. It actually said the MBA Radio Award. But the 4 guys, the key was that on the Sunday after the MBA group, they already had the cards there. They were at the back of church. When people came in and went out, they were handing them out, flagging up the next one. It was very hands-on. It was very systematic. And part of the attraction of it was that it was a good laugh. It was good fun to do. It was different every month. I think by the time I left, I counted up about 120 men in the village who had come through it, and we averaged probably about 50 or 60 of an evening. And it sounds like what Rafe was saying before, it was a mixture of approaches, but still you could have the conversations. I think I did one a year, if that, where it would be a bit, you know, provocative again, but I would line up to do a series of 6 open to questions in the pub, the blokes, following on from it. And some of them worked, some of them didn't. I remember we got the Bishop of Leicester, Tom Butler, to come in at one time, and he said to me, I've got to be out by 8:30, because I think he was up at 5 in the morning to do something or other. So I said, I'll get you out. He'd been with us all afternoon. I'd taken him into Checkham Kindly sides. We'd done all sorts of stuff, went into the school. So I took him in, and he was really tired when he arrived. I learned a lot about bishoping there. Don't yawn when you arrive, you know, in the parish, as if you don't want to be there. So we got him in, and you guys gave him the theme, does the Church of England believe in anything? Which I thought was a bit rough, and gave him 10 minutes to address it. And he addressed it for 10 minutes, and then he was hammered for about an hour. And I kept trying to get him out. I got him out at 9:45 and said, I'm really sorry. And he said, it's the best thing I've done since I became Bishop of Leeds. And I learned a lot from these things, that people like me get put in pigeonholes. So if I go to do a parish visit, they assume I want to go to the old people's home, which can be great, especially if they're playing whist or something, because I can usually win. It's like playing snooker against our two boys. It's because they're both colourblind. Now, which one's the brown? I'm not telling you. So, you've got to choose your sports. But I saw the bishop at his best, not swanning around in church with his hat on, but actually engaging with people who wouldn't normally engage with him. And that fed the bishop. I've never forgotten that. And I reminded of him, he's up in my neck of the woods now, and he's brilliant. And I must tell you this then, he was chair of the interim Darson Board of Finance while we were going through our massive transition. We dissolved 3 dioceses, created one enormous one. I've got 656 churches now. I'd like to plant another 10, just so I can have 666 and wind up all the fundamentals. People think I'm full of missionary zeal. It's not. You've got to find your laugh somewhere. I can't remember what I was telling you. Oh, yeah. Tom was chair of the interim DBF. I made him the interim acting area bishop of Bradford, Darson Board of Finance. I said it earlier. Should have been listening. And we had to get one office. We've been operating from 4 offices. We started with no infrastructure, no governance, no nothing 2.5 years ago. 30 months ago, we had nothing, and we've had to build it. We finally moved into our new office in the centre of Leeds 3 weeks ago. It's been really, people have no idea what it's been like. But anyway, when we went for it, there were 3 freehold properties in Leeds. And we looked at this one. I hadn't visited it, but I'd looked at the stuff, and I said, yeah, okay. So he rang me one day and he said, it's a blind bid, blind auction. We're going to put in a bid, but I've just got one concern. There are 2 gentlemen's lap dancing clubs on the same road. Do you think there's any reputational risk? So I said, to whom? I'd like to see how long they last. With loads of vicars walking past. And I've just taken on a new director of communications who spent 16 years with the News of the World, 8 years with the People. He knows the place quite well and who was members. This is going to be very useful. Get these guys on the light side, away from the dark side. But anyway, I mean, the point of this is that with the MBA group, the idea was that we could engage with where particularly men were. The women got jealous. They set up absolutely fabulous. Never lasted, did it? But we set it up to provide a forum for which is sometimes going to be more explicit than others, where we can ask the questions and do the Christian stuff with how we engage with the world. Now, the last one I went to before I moved down to London to be Archdeacon of Lambeth, I will never forget, because we had John Eggleston in a wheelchair, and this is probably 3 or 4 weeks before he died, doing a double header with Rafe on what does it mean to be a Christian in business with filthy lucre and the greasy stuff of the arms industry and engineering and all of that. When Rafe, we knew, had been party to closing plants and the loss of huge numbers of jobs, that question, how do you do that when you know that's going to lead to marriage breakdowns, family breakups, suicides, all sorts of stuff? How do you do that? And John, of course, responsible for the lives of, if you take all the people he employed, and their families, and all the knock-on businesses and all of that. And some people sneer at business or at the money business. How do you do that as a Christian? And I remember Rafe and John said to me, well, what do you want us to do? And I said, have a conversation between the two of you and let's listen in. And I was sitting next at the back of the thing, sitting next to a guy. I don't know if he's still around, but so I won't identify him. He was very big in business. He retired. And I remember John asking, hands up if you've ever been made redundant. And a few hands went up. And then either Rafe or John said, how many of you have been made redundant more than once? And some hands went up. And I was sitting next to this guy